Hi everyone. So this is a follow-up video to the last intensive session that you've had with us, where we looked at writing up your first assignments on the PG Cert. Now what I want to do is I want to give you two potential recipes, if you like, or two potential formulas that you can use to get really good master's level evaluative and reflective writing. So when looking at this kind of writing, really what we're asking for is for you to show us that you're being both well informed and thoughtful about your professional practice and your approaches to developing as a professional. And of course, the way that you really show us that thoughtfulness is by picking specific moments from your professional development, key critical incidents, and unpacking those and showing us how you're thinking about, professional decisions that you make, thinking about how you're quantifying those changes and seeing the impact that they have on your students' learning and the impact they have in your own learning process. Equally, the way that you show us how well informed you are, well, that's where you bring in key ideas, key concepts from the PG Cert, and also wider reading into educational literature in order to support and to substantiate that decision making and that professional thinking that you're doing. So really what this means is linking up your wider reading with specific reflections on your experiences, right? Now, there are obviously quite a few ways of doing this, but you already have PECTA. So if you recall back to the intensive, PECTA is a particular writing frame that we use on the PG Cert. So PECTA stands for point, evidence, critical thinking, and argument. So, if you want to refresh on that particular frame of writing, you're more than welcome to go back to those slides and go through it. What I'm going to give you in this video is two formulas that are based off PECTA and that in some way seek to create a useful dialogue between your reading and between your evidence and your own ideas and your own reflections. And actually both of those formulas start from a different place, but equally they both form that critical link that is a really good hallmark of professional writing at this level. Now, at the centre of your pieces, if we're talking about the main essay, your PGO1 assignment, learning outcomes 1 and 2, well, the argument that we're building up towards is all about your evaluation of particular moments from your practice, changes that you've made, and your professional development overall. So if you remember, what we've advised is we've advised a couple of different, 2 or 3 specific changes that you've made, 2 particular critical incidents maybe, and evaluating how successful they were, the strengths, the weaknesses, the challenges, and really what they mean for your development as a teacher. So there are actually loads and loads of ways of approaching this kind of writing. Part of the problem of teaching master's level writing is that it is very personal, because it's reflective, because it's based on your experiences. There'll be lots of different ways to slice it. Now, that being said, there are 2 particular approaches, 2 kind of classic ways that you might achieve it. And as I said, both of these are based on PECTA. They're also based on this idea of critical incident, as I've said. Now, this has come up on the blog, and I know that we've covered it in some of the intensives, but to quickly recap, a critical incident is just an example from our work. An example that has a kind of critical or high level of importance to us. So there might be moments of uncertainty, moments of particular complexity, and incidents from our practice that have a high potential in terms of our learning and our development. Because what we do is we pick those incidents and experiences and kind of go round the reflective cycle. So either in the assignment or before the assignment in your own learning process, unpacking what happened in those moments in order to learn from them and generate a route forward. Now, what we do not mean by a critical incident is we don't necessarily mean incidents where everything's blown up in your face, right? So we're not always looking for things that go horrendously wrong. It's not critical in that regard. It's just incidents that you feel have, enough depth to them, or enough critical importance to your own development. So these might be a one-off class, might be specific moments within a class, or they might be, longer systematic interventions. Maybe a change you've made to your curriculum or to your assessment strategy. So they might play out over, the course of quite a few weeks or even months. And the whole idea, as we've said, is to really show us how you're thinking about the very complex and messy place that classrooms and learning relationships are, right? So both in a well-informed way and in a thoughtful way, taking specific examples where you've made an intentional change or an intervention, and then giving us a critical narrative, very briefly, of what happened and leading up to that evaluation, what worked, what didn't work so well in these particular incidents. Lovely. So, as I said, I've got two particular formulas to show you. And formula one, approach one, we like to call he said, she said, right? So this is a particular formula that's based on comparing, contrasting, and judging two different theoretical perspectives, right? So this is a fantastic way of getting critical dialogue, not just between our own professional thinking and theory, but actually also between different theorists, right? So the particular formula for this goes, I wanted to improve or work on or find out about subject X, right? So we make a point, at the beginning of the critical incident, maybe you wanted to improve your use of peer feedback in the classroom, or maybe you wanted to improve your use of questioning. Brilliant. So next, critic one suggests, or educational theorist suggests, X. So I wanted to improve, my use of questioning in the classroom. So I consulted Dylan William, and Dylan William suggests having a 3-second pause before using or before having the answer to questions from students. Now, there's an optional step here. If you really want to show off the wider reading that you've been doing, you can bring in other theorists that support that particular viewpoint. So, theorist X, Y, and Z agree on this, or they all have the kind of particular same start. Okay, brilliant. Next step then, critic 2 suggests something different. So either you found a particular theorist that has, a 180 completely different take on the particular subject, or maybe you found two particular theoretical models that are kind of pointing in the same direction, but have slightly different emphases, but really, you're trying to find and reconcile meaning between two different perspectives. And again, at this stage, if you want to show off your wider reading, you can bring in any other critics or theorists that agree with critic number 2. So next step, having looked at those two, well, in light of my experience, I now think that X. So this person says this, there's another perspective over here, but based on having used it, based on my experiences with my students in my professional environment, this is the conclusion that I've come to. And importantly, we need to know why. So next step, because, right? So these are fantastic examples for you to show your critical thinking, both to reconcile and form a conclusion based on your experience and based on having seen different theoretical opinion, and also to show your rationale, for why you think your perspective, or why you think, the result or the impact that you got in your practice was convincing. And finally, tying it all back up, pointing forwards, what I've learned / what I will do next is A. So you can see that through the use of PECTA, we're focusing on that argument, that evaluative argument, on what you've learned, how well things worked, where you're going next in your development, building it up through point, through a couple of different theoretical perspectives to use as evidence, and then we're thinking critically about all of that, bringing in our own observational and experiential evidence as a practitioner in order to find an explanation and generate a better way forward for our practice. So that's formula number one, he said, she said. Now we also have a second approach, right? I like to call loop the loop. Now you'll notice that formula one started with the theory, right? So actually we're going to start in a different place, and we're going to start from our experiences, and we're just going to go round the loop of reflective thinking about the critical incident that we did, and our reading is going to come in at a different point, right? So instead of starting with the reading, it's now going to support the arguments that we're making from a different angle. So as I said, this is all about professional reflection, starting from your practice, with reading be a kind of support network. So the particular formula for this goes, I decided to adopt a particular teaching approach. I decided to adopt learning outcomes in my class for the first time. Or maybe I decided to try out flipped learning or problem-based learning. This is because either I observed it and or I got feedback on my own teaching and this seemed to be a useful way forward, and or I read about it. So getting really clear on the evidence, why we took this particular approach. This is our rationale for making an intentional change. Okay, thirdly, this is actually what happened when I tried it. So specifically, what worked well and specifically what didn't work so well or what could have been better. So critical thinking based off particular moments that form evidence from our practice. So we're really looking to see particular student behaviours, maybe wanting to see the change in our students' work over time, or a difference in engagement, or maybe particular feedback that you've had from students, from observers, all that support that judgment of what was going well and what wasn't going so well. Again, fourthly, importantly, this is why I think this happened. Really relating your reflections to something you've read. So, potentially, maybe a student's walked out of your class. Maybe it is one of those highly critical incidents. Okay, well, you tried that approach, you tried some behaviour management, a student worked out. Well, why do you think that happened? Draw upon some behaviour management frameworks. Maybe draw upon ideas of psychology or ideas of particular student motivation. Maybe that had an impact in some way. So supporting your explanation for why events transpired in the way that they did. Because if you can get that bit right, and that explanation and analysis all make sense, then when we point towards your final learning, what I've learned, what I will do next is, well, actually all the evidence for that is already taken care of. And that argument now makes sense, and you've got the explanation and the support for it. So we want to make sure that your rationale and you're thinking critically all the way through this. So this is loop the loop. You can see again, starting from your professional practice, implementing a change, being clear about why you made that change, clear about what worked and what didn't, based on evidence, potentially also based on reading as well, a clear explanation for why things happened, and pointing forward to the next stages in your professional development. Lovely. So another way to look at this, okay, both of those examples might have been good enough for you. Another way to look at this is through the use of questions. So when I write, I actually find writing from other kinds of prompts quite difficult. I tend to approach my writing by formulating questions as I go. And really trying to think about what's expected of me at every single stage of the journey. So what I've put together is I've put together essentially a series of questions based on Pector, mainly based on Formula 2 on Loop the Loop, but incorporating a bit of he said, she said as well. And you're welcome to use this if you want as a sort of roadmap for one half of your assignment or part of your assignment. So again, all the time that we're using Pector, we need to be really clear that we're building up towards a really solid overall argument. So thinking about a particular critical incident, a thing we wanted to change, okay, what was I trying to do and how well did I go, right? So in 50 words or less, that's my destination, that's what I'm getting to. Brilliant. Okay, so in guiding the reader through that, very similar to the loop, what issue or problem did I spot? And how did I know that was a particular problem? Was it observation? Was it reading? Was it something else in my practice? What did I plan to do about it? Specifically, what did I design that was an intervention, and how does that aim to meet that particular issue or problem? Why this strategy? Do I have theoretical reading? Do I have observational evidence? This is a good way forward. And thinking a bit critically, why not any other strategy? Say that I've got students that are disengaged with their class, right? There are multiple ways to increase engagement. I could try question openers. I could try more video content. I could try getting guest lecturers in, or I could try aligning the content closer to the assessment. And all of those will probably have some form of impact. So thinking critically about those options, why did I think my route forward was the most successful or the most reasonable one? Putting it into practice now, very quickly going through the narrative, what happened when I tried it? Being very specific, what did that look like in the room? Again, looking for behaviours, looking for key moments, pieces of feedback, or key observable products or kind of processes that students were going through. Then we get into the big evaluative bit. What were the strengths of my approach? Maybe different paragraphs for each of those. You can take this in different ways. What were the strengths? What specifically in the room, what specifically of observable behaviours told me that worked? Again, you could just draw back to previous things you've already written at this point. And also think a bit critically, why did this work? Draw in some theoretical frameworks. Think about past observable, experiences that you've been in. What's your explanation for why things happened in the way that they did? Thinking a bit more critically, could those things have been interpreted in any different ways? How good is the evidence for your evaluation that things worked? Is it based just on your own intuitions? Or is it based on student feedback, when they weren't really in a position to disconfirm or to give you their honest answers? Could there have been any other reasons why things happened in the way that they did? Is the theory that you've used to explain the situation actually that convincing, or does that have some flaws? Now at this stage you really don't need to answer every single one of these questions. You'll get into a horrible critical spiral and you probably never get anywhere. But I find them very useful prompts to kind of open up the box and to get more of that deep thinking in. Because really we just want to see what's happened, why you think that's happened, and really why you think that's a reasonable thing to believe. And similarly, in exactly the same way, take us through that process for the weaknesses of your approach or the things that were challenging. What in the room told you it worked? Why did you think it worked? And then question your own assumptions, question your own explanations a bit critically. Lovely. We're getting very close to the end at this point. So what have you learned for next time? Specifically, what might you do in your practice that's different based on some of this learning that you've generated? And are there any particular questions or doubts that you're left with? And what might you do to go and answer them? So are there any remaining concerns or doubts you have about your own practice? And why? And what might you do to either mitigate them in future practice, or perhaps to read and to find out more? So that's it. I'm aware this has been quite a long video. Hopefully this has given you some good goalposts to work with in thinking about how you might frame and articulate some critical evaluative writing in your essays. One good approach is for your main essay. Obviously, we suggest you have two particular things you talk about. You might want to split your essay down the middle then and sort of view it as two 1,250 word essays. Well, you could take the loop approach for one, you could take the he said, she said approach for the other. So don't take these as absolutely prescriptive, but take them as suggestions that you can riff off and you can bounce off in order to find, an approach that really works for you and works for the experiences that you're having and for the ideas that you're having as a practitioner. And really, I just encourage you to trust in that process. And if you do have any doubts about that process, of course, as always, book in a tutorial, get some support with us, and we'll look at your draft and your writing, and we'll make sure that you can get in something that you're really proud of. Beyond being an assessment, I think the PG Cert creates the opportunities for you guys to write about your experiences in a deep and an articulate way, so that you can create a piece of work that you are truly proud of. And we're really committed to ensuring that you do that. So that's it for now. Take care. See you soon.